Jane Brown of Tualatin. Welcome.
Thank you.
And what we're going to do, we have some questions for you, and hopefully that'll lead us to some interesting stories about your history with Tualatin.
Oh, well, that would be fun.
So to get started, could you tell us your full name and when and where you were born?
Well, my full name is Margaret Jane Brown, and unfortunately, I go by Jane Brown all my life, but because my legal signature, it goes over the phone, Margaret Brown. People don't know who that is a lot of times. I was born in December 15th of 1924, and in Grants Pass, Oregon, so I've been an Oregonian all my life, except for a couple of months, years rather. And I was born to Martha and Baird Finley. Both of those people were raised, or at least met in Salem, Oregon. And they were descended from Scotch, Welsh, Irish, and English. The history's been traced back to the British Isles. I have had a sister and a brother, and then I was the youngest. Both of them are deceased now. We had, from Grants Pass, we moved to Rickrell. My father had problems with his back, so he finished Oregon State, and then he took us to Washington. He raised sheep this was during the Depression, and then that didn't pan out, so we moved back to Rickrell. His father had owned this farm that he had sold, but the man couldn't keep the payments up during the Depression. And so I spent all from third grade on in Rickrell. And it's a normal life on a farm, but the war came along, and so even before the war, my father had us driving the truck or working out in the equipment. So during the war, my sister and I did all of the mechanical, driving the tractors, doing the hay and mowing that for the dairy farm. And then we did the combining, which was drawn by a 30 cat, so Caterpillar. And so it was working outside of the home of that. I actually graduated from Dallas High my last year. Rickrell had a high school, but there was only 3 teachers, and there were only 3 in my grade. So I conned Dad. I'd made some money working for another farmer and paid the tuition to go to Dallas High my last year. I went to Willamette for 2 years and graduated from Oregon State the next 2 years, and met John Skeen when he came back from the war. He was a resident of Corvallis, and we were married June 16th, 1946. He hadn't finished college, but because of the GI Bill, he went to Pacific University and graduated and became an elementary teacher. And his first job was at Tualatin Elementary School as 7th grade teacher. And so we moved and lived there on Boone's Ferry for the first year, and then rented a house from Joe Edel, who ran the buses, and the second until 52 or 53, we built a house on Boone's Ferry just up from the elementary school. It was between Sagert and Avery, and the house still remains. Being soon after we were there in our house, John went hunting with Clayton Nyberg, and there were a lot of fields, and there were pheasants and quails. And John came home and he said, "Do not say anything against anybody in this area. They're all related." So that's why we came to Tualatin and lived there until John died in, he was 99, so that was about, well, it was in 99.
And what about your family? Did you and John have children, and what were their names?
Well, we had 4 children. We had Susanna, Shirley, Julia, and Martin. They all were married. And they live, let's see, two live in California and one in Medford, and then Marty, who was a builder here, died about 4 years ago. And so they all had finished school.
And what about you when they were growing up? Were you a stay-at-home mom?
I was stay-at-home. John was from the area where he felt that women should be at home, and it would be a reflection on him if he couldn't provide. And it was skimpy, but he joined the National Guards because there was other wars coming on, the Korean War and so forth, and he felt that he'd rather be an officer than an enlisted man, which he was top sergeant in the service. So he stayed in the military then until reserve, until he had over 30 years in, so he retired from that. And we had a large, our property was 80 wide, but it was very deep, so we had a large gardens and canned, and I made clothes and did the normal things that we did. Belonged to, at school functions, at school there used to be Mother's Singers, that, and so I joined that for a little while, and there was a garden club that I joined until more children, and I didn't have time to go to that. And so then during the school, we belonged to the PTA, of course, and they had different programs. One of them was that we would go out and harvest the fields for like beans and different fruit, and then we would take those to the professional canneries. They had home canneries where you could do and they would do that so for the food, for the cafeteria, so that furnish food for there was one of the things that the PTA did. And then we had different programs, and one time the men did a sack dance where they put sacks over their head, and then they did these dances. And then we did some, or was that for the men? Maybe, well, anyway, the women had some dances. They did the can. I think that can dance was really for the men, and then the women had some other dances too. And then we had the Ginsmans did a magical act where they had a coffin and they cut off the head, and they did all these other sort of magical things up there on stage.
So were these programs that the children of the school were invited to as well, or were
Oh
these...
yes, it was put on by the parents, but it was monthly, or, you know, one of the monthly meetings, so.
And can you tell me what it was like being married to the school principal? And did your children go to the school where he was principal?
Well, yes, the children went there. And John never wanted me to make a lot of opinionated, say what I thought, because he felt it would be a reflection. People would think that that's the way he thought about things. So you had to really sort of bite your tongue sometimes if you disagreed with other policies. But people, since we lived right near the school, it was hard because if you had friends in, other people knew who was there. Or one night we were entertaining a friend, a doctor and his wife, and there was a rap on the door, and it was for Dr. Stearns, and they said, well, how did you find me? He said, well, we just went to all the places that you might be and, and your friends, and here it was. So it was really a small community, and you had to be careful of what you said, different things.
And what would you say has changed the most in Tualatin over the years?
Well, I think a lot of it, when we first came there and built our house, to get city water, the people on Sagert Street, there were houses, the Sylvies, there were several houses there, and they had water, but they really weren't in the city. And so they voted to become into the city, and we were also voted in so we could get water at that time. There came a period where there was a lack of water for people. The water was furnished by wells in the lower part of the city, and they became dry. And I think John was on council at that time, and the council was offered a storage tank that was in Vancouver, but free, but they didn't have enough money to transport the container to Tualatin and set it up. There was some homes. One of them was Earl Fewless that lived up behind the Byram house. And they had a deep well. It went down a deep well. And so they allowed the city to take water from there until they could solve the problem down below. So, you know, it was bad enough so we couldn't even hardly flush our toilets, that there wasn't enough water at that time. Eventually, the city was able to afford to have a city administrator, which was Yvonne Addington, and also they were able to get water from Bull Run, from Portland, through Portland, and also then they put in sewers shortly after that. But there wasn't much revenue for the city because there was just a cat and dog food factory and homes until the Meridian Park came in, and so.
And did you live along between Sagard and Avery for the entire time you lived in Tualatin, or
Yes.
did you move?
No, we had built that house, and we had it framed by Dick Price, and then a lot of the work John did. And we put an addition on it once, and I was up on the roof pregnant, and someone told John, "Would you get your wife off the roof? Everyone's complaining." So, as they go by. So in later years, after John retired, or maybe the children were gone, I started growing garlic. I always loved to make my own money, and I did that, and then I did dried flowers for a while. And then about the time that Marty got married, and the florist said, "Well, why don't you raise this status and raise flowers for the fresh market?" So I did have a flower business I planted and cared for it, did it all on the back of my property. Didn't grow vegetables so much at that time. And so that was very enjoyable for me to go to the florists and sell. And I had maybe 6 to 10 different places I went twice a week with my flowers. So it was enjoyable to me. That's the only time actually that I did much work outside of the home.
And did you do much traveling, either when you were married to John Brown or since he passed?
Actually, we had a trailer that we used to go and trailer mostly to the beach when the family was here. But after the family left, we went on some cruises together. And the first big trip we had, other than a cruise, we went to Australia because Julia had been a foreign exchange student there, and so her parents, foreign exchange parents, had visited us when they came to the United States, so they wanted us to come, so we went over there and visited with them. The O'Callaghan's, Claire and Pat, came over after we'd been there a couple of weeks, and then we all went on holiday, as they call it, to an island, and enjoyed that. And then we came back to Sydney, and then we rented a car and followed the bus route clear to Portland, which took in Melbourne and then to the middle of the lower state, and then flew to New Zealand and home. And then after John had his heart surgery, my daughter, who lives in Medford, who had a travel agency, was taking a group of her friends to Africa. And so Mom, she said, "Why don't you call and see if some of your friends want to go too?" And go. John couldn't go, but so Claire O'Callaghan and Dorothea Pennington went with us, and then another gal. And we went to Africa, which was just really enjoyable. And then Dorothea Pennington and I went traveling on the river from Budapest to Amsterdam. And we were over there when the 911 towers went down. So, and then I've done more. After John died, I've gone on more cruises and a few trips. We used to go to Hawaii a lot when John was still alive.
What's your favorite place to visit?
Oh, I think Africa was the most fascinating one.
And do you visit so you took the trip with your daughter, but do you visit with your other children
Oh, usually spent winters with my oldest daughter in Palm Springs, and then I'll. The two older girls have a jewelry business. They make sea glass jewelry, and so twice a year we go to. I drive to Medford and then go with my daughter down to these two different things. And so that hopefully will go this next year. I couldn't manage it this year, so.
And what do you miss most about Tualatin and how it's changed from when you first moved here to how it is now?
I just think that they've done a good job of developing Tualatin. Too bad the traffic is so bad, but can't seem to go anywhere without that traffic. Life has changed coming from a small place, but I do think that it was easier for me after John died, after about 4 years. I moved to Summerfield, and it wasn't just from Tualatin, but all my friends were dying and had moved away, but most of them had died. And so I needed to make new friends. And it's, unless you live in a community where there's children and you make friends, and of course you can go to church and make friends too. It's very hard when those friends all die to make new friends, because the people that move in have completely different interests. So it's really nice to go to an area where you play golf and you can still garden, which you might too, and read and entertain.
And were you living in Tualatin when the Columbus Day storm happened? And if so, how did that impact you and your family, and then also the school?
I was here. Our roof blew off, and John opened up the school. The school had water and electricity to a lot of people who didn't have electricity, so that they could bathe and take care there. Also, that chainsaw got a workout. It seemed like anyone that had a chainsaw helped other people with getting into their driveway or getting the trees that blew over out. It was, people really helped each other during the Columbus Day storm.
And are there other things, other stories you have that you'd like to tell us about Tualatin and living here and raising children?
Let's see. Does anyone mention that? I think it was like, let's see. We came to Tualatin in 49. I think it was either in 49 or 50. The Tualatin Bridge went down. A truck went over it. It was right close to Thanksgiving, and damaged a support some way, and so it wasn't used. So it was very hard. You had to go clear over into Oswego to get across the Tualatin River, or you had to go out to Looney's Corner or over to 99 to get over towards Tigard, and that. So that was kind of disrupting. And in those days, I-5 only went to the north side of Tualatin River. So there wasn't I-5 on the south, so you couldn't use that bridge. So that was kind of a thing. Another thing, one Sunday morning, early we had heard this huge crash, and somehow a freight car was on Boone's Ferry down near the town itself. And there'd been someone had done a switch wrong in the track, and it was over. And that, so that was kind of interesting. And I was thinking too that I remember Tualatin having at least 2 grocery stores and a meat market, separate meat market when we first came. And then there was the Red Corner store, brick store, was a grocery store, and then there was another one over near Sylvie Company, and then one of those went out, and then there was another one down there. So, and then this was all before Thriftways came in, because we did have then a Thriftway, and then Fred Meyer's. So.
And how often would you do your shopping?
Oh, it just would depend. A lot of times we went to Safeway's in Tigard, which isn't there anymore, up where they were. I'm not sure how often I did it, because when there was a store down there, we just went.
And are there other things you would like someone from the future to know about your life and what it was like living in Tualatin?
Oh, it was enjoyable to me. I had a lot of friends and little groups that we got together with, so that was fun. So, no, there isn't anything more that I know of.
And then do you have a life philosophy that you try to live your life by?
I just try really hard to accept people for what they are and not try to make judgment.
And do you have anything else you'd like to share with us today? Any stories that have come to mind?
None that I can think of offhand now.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jane, for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.